You know, in movies, when violence goes from being about heroicism and instead just turns to brutalism. I think of movies like Green Street or Gangs of New York, where the beatings continue, the music drops, and us as the audience member go from cheering to almost feeling rather sick. That was my first thought when I caught that whole Rajah Jackson situation. But the only difference is it wasn't filmed 4K by performing actors in a studio. It was streamed live to kick, live, raw, and disturbingly real. And some of the reactions, let's be honest, they've been quite surreal. Modernity has such penis envy, doesn't it? Masculinity is romanticized, demonized, fantasized, stigmatized, commodified more than ever. Masculinity is not about what masculinity does anymore. It's about how masculinity feels. And when you mix low emotional IQ with sometimes low cognitive IQ, you have chaos. Weakness dressed up as strength. But here's the thing, no matter how philosophical we want to get, how deep off the end we go in order to define what it is to be a man, one virtue I think sticks out and is a bit of a non-negotiable in this definition, and that's steadfastness. The ability to control our environment and what our actions, and therefore ultimately control ourselves. So yes, learning to kick ass and kicking ass is an important part of that definition. Having a capacity for violence is important, but without the emotional regulation cornerstone, it's not really a complete definition. Now I'm going to be biased, because me and the lady went to go and watch a WWE concert not too long ago. We had no idea who the fucking popular wrestlers are. We went there booing and cheering, couple of beers deep, and it was a great night. Now I thought to myself when all this went on, if I was there that night and I was called out by one of the wrestlers and they happened to hit me with a steel chair, I would have taken out like a 50 cal fucking sniper round. I wouldn't have been worrying about my ego or how I come across. I just would have known the assignment. For you don't step into a pantomime and not realise it's part of the act. But that's just me. I've loved and studied martial arts for the majority of my life. But as a wee lad, I did have a massive soft spot for pro wrestling. People clown on pro wrestling, but if we're honest with ourselves, it's quite a highly civilized version of warfare pantomime. It's still the bread and circus for modern Rome. We still get our fixation of that tribal need, the good guy and the bad guy. The performers sell the archetypes of the heel as well as the babyface. And it's fixating our need for that kind of violence and the enjoyment of almost performance. But at the same time, there's not as much blood in the sand. Obviously, contrast that to combat sports, it's completely different. That is the Coliseum 101. Two equals agreeing on terms to meet in the middle, competing against one another, blending that paradox between chaos and respect. This Rajah Jackson and Stu situation, it wasn't sport, it wasn't theatre. It was a hybrid that collapsed into utter brutality. Growing up in your father's shadow while trying to stream online, chasing clout and trying to carve out your own identity. Nepo baby of a champion, an MMA hopeful himself, but entertainer on the side. To me that sounds already a bit of a pressure cooker. An ex-serviceman, a man who's seen contractual violence, now using wrestling's performative violence as a form of therapy. Both chasing order in the chaos, just in different ways. Story starts off with an invitation to come along to one of these like indie circuit, backyard wrestling type situations. But Rajah Jackson turns up with his filming crew, or supposedly his coach, and is hanging out backstage with the wrestlers. I say backstage, it's a car park. I don't think you can really call it backstage at that level. Assumptions were made, and as we all know, assumptions are the key to every fuck up. Stu starts an interaction with Rajah, makes an attempt to involve him in this kind of performative narrative. And then whilst it kind of is received a little bit as a shock to Rajah because he's like, what are you doing, his reaction, ironically, was the kind of reaction that wrestlers do give, like, why the fuck do you do that, man? You know, I'm not to be played with, I'm going to fuck you up, that type of situation. And he gets told by the other wrestlers, this guy is not a performer, he's literally just come to, you know, get clout, just as you're all filming and everyone in fucking Black Mirror's filming everyone at every moment. So it was a little bit awkward, and it kind of escalates. There was some threats kind of made, obviously, by Raja because he's not happy, and in essence, he feels like he has been assaulted, and in a way, I guess he has, giving Raja kind of the green light to give a receipt. Now, from my limited understanding of the wrestling game, a receipt, I guess, is kind of like a stiff shot. I guess if you're hitting people and missing or whatever, an actual stiff one would be kind of clocking on the jaw a little bit, just to remind them, not to incapacitate them, because obviously the show's got to go on. Get herself in a misunderstanding. Hey, you know, I thought this, you thought that. I apologise, and shake hands. And that shaking of the hands really is like a contractual thing, isn't it, between masculinity, between a being of your word. And you would hope in that instance it was all kind of squash, right? That's pretty straightforward. Assumptions, key to all fuck ups, misunderstanding, amplification of combative energy, de-escalation. That really should be the end of the story, but sadly it wasn't.
2 hours later.
Poor Raja's getting like needled by his clout goblins that are telling him, you know, you're this, you're that, you're not a man, you're a bitch, all these type of things that are reinforcing the paradigm that we spoke about earlier. He stands up, pulls his pants up, scoops up Psycho Stu. And obviously, remember, in pro wrestling, a lot of their moves that they perform, as impressive as what they are, there is some involvement between both the parties there in order to perform the move. So as soon as that Stu probably felt his legs being grabbed from underneath him, the poor bastard probably jumped up into it. And you can see the angle that Raja's kind of got him in there, that he's like heads behind his arse. There's only one way that person's going down. So with him up in the air, pride style, doing what his father did in competition, Raja slams him down to the floor, and physics does the rest. Hypothetically, a lawyer could say that this is someone who doesn't know what they're doing, and that, you know, shit slam, really quite dangerous slam, was just through ignorance. And you could argue to the point that when you witness this person who you slammed down is actually out, even if there was a little bit of grievance from earlier, that would be enough. But no, as his head hits the canvas, clearly lights out, sprawled like a starfish in the middle of the ring, Raja jumps up on top of him in mount and throws down punches after punches, and I think it was counted on the punch clock at like 20 odd punches. And you can tell how much intention's behind the shots, because as he misses, he then has to post himself back up again. And if you think about that in MMA context, fighters are a lot careful about what they throw from the ground and pound, because too much of a telegraph shot or an overexposure to that could put them in a bad position. The karma was the slam, it wasn't the follow-up shots. Thank God someone jumps in and de-escalates, and by a de-escalation, I think that wrestler done really well not to amplify it, like, you know, throw punches himself and keep that combative energy. He was just trying to kind of bring him down. But here's where modernity shows its hand, not necessarily in the story, but in the fucking reactions. Some of the reactions have been absolutely unbelievable. Some people were describing it as like a work, and like Stu was going to just come back, you know, this week in Survivor Series and get his payback. Some were saying that, you know, it was the responsibility of the organisation, that, you know, fuck about and you find out, is kind of the narrative from his dad at the moment. All trying to absolve responsibility. And there was even the racism cry, which you can expect in modernity, right? Polarity between race doesn't matter, between race is everything to do with it. Failing to see the patterns and the logic and the justification, really, and accountability of individual actions. If you think about it, it's the most anti-masculine thing to do, is to then absolve yourself of responsibility, because men are responsible for their actions, their deeds, their words, etc. For masculinity and victimhood can't really coexist. People describing this as an adjective as animalistic behaviour. But if you really think about that, animals don't really meditate on violence in the way that a human can, you know, like psychopaths or sociopaths, for example. If an animal is going to attack, it's going to defend itself, it's usually on instinct. And if you think about it, that's where those people that have said, oh, if Raja just hit him as soon as he hit him with the prop can or the real can, then it will all be okay. And you could justify there, maybe legally, that, yeah, that is kind of an instinct, right? Instinct to getting hit is either fight back or get the fuck out of there. But not premeditation, because if we're honest with ourselves, it's not animalistic, it's actually psychotic. It's psychotic. Because animals are not really capable of that level of meditation on violence about how I'm going to get my revenge. I've left it a little while to do this video, which you could say at the YouTube and the life cycle, it's kind of dead now, no one cares about it. But it's interesting to see how responses even then go through that law of rhythm and that cycle, because Rampage has gone from everywhere for apologies to offering a support for Stu to then saying that he's been targeted and it's unfair, all the way to recently where he's saying that, you know, if he was there, he would have assaulted him as well. You got his dad who's chasing kind of clout or respect. Ironically, his old man's got enough respect from the fighting community for his services in combat sports, right? But he's chasing this new kind of entertainer avenue, and his son's pulled into it, but I don't think his son really has that emotional warmth, nor do I think he's that entertaining really. But they're kind of prostituting themselves, as people do with this content creation space where nothing is intimate anymore. Emotional intelligence is being aware of what's going on internally. If you know you're compromised, and in that case of Raja, right, he's 25 years of age, he's not a kid, but he is young in that life cycle of things. That's again a maturity and a masculinity thing that needs to be taught, and that's probably more important sometimes than just the fighting, because if you're going to be a good fighter, right, a lot of it is regulating your emotions, but just socially as well. If we ever find ourselves in a position where something's not right, women are very good at this. They can sense the room or sense people that make them uncomfortable. Men do have intuition as well. It's just sometimes our ego then will tell us to fight rather than flight, because only bitches flight. So at any point really, the cause and effect cycle, the rhythm, the exposure to this type of energy could have been completely de-escalated by him removing himself. Just put his phone down for a second and he thought to himself, actually, that's upset me, or that's angered me, and I'm feeling X, Y, and Z. That ability to regulate would have been the difference between potentially him having, you know, freedom and him having none at all. Turn it off, guys. Put it down. What was that South Park song? Put it down. Put it down. You could say Stu was burned by the village because he was paid to set it ablaze. Raja, a child burned by the village, chasing the warmth in the fire of strangers' approval. Being a man isn't necessarily about ego or revenge. Being a man is about virtues, knowing when to fight and when to walk away, and knowing that some battles, especially the ones against our own pride, are the most important battles to win.